I never thought my own parents would sell my car while I was at work and pocket the money, but when I came home that Tuesday evening and saw an empty driveway where my cherry red 1967 Mustang should have been, I knew my life was about to change forever. My name is Jessica, and 6 months ago I thought I had finally made it. At 26, I was working as a senior marketing coordinator for a tech startup in Austin, Texas. The pay was decent, the work was challenging, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was building something real. But none of that mattered as much as what was sitting in my driveway every evening when I came home from work. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. She was a 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback, cherry red with white racing stripes, and she was absolutely perfect. I'd bought her 8 months earlier from an elderly man named Frank who'd kept her in pristine condition for over 30 years. The moment I saw her gleaming in his garage, I knew she was meant to be mine. Frank had smiled when he saw the look in my eyes and said something I'll never forget. "She's not just a car, honey, she's a dream with wheels." He was asking $18,000 for her, which was every penny I'd saved over 2 years of living in a studio apartment, eating ramen noodles, and working overtime whenever I could get it. My friends thought I was crazy to spend that much money on a car when I could have bought something practical and reliable. My sister Emma laughed outright when I told her about it, shaking her head like I'd just announced I was joining the circus. But my parents, they understood. At least, I thought they did. When I brought the Mustang home for the first time, my dad whistled low and walked around her twice, running his hand along the hood. "Now that's a real car," he said, and I could hear the genuine appreciation in his voice. My mom took pictures of me sitting behind the wheel, grinning like an idiot, and posted them on Facebook with the caption, "So proud of my hard-working daughter living her dreams." I saved that post. I thought it meant something. The Mustang became more than just transportation. She was my sanctuary, my pride, my proof that all those years of sacrifice had been worth something. Every Saturday morning, I'd wake up early and spend hours detailing her, polishing every inch of chrome until it gleamed like a mirror. I learned how to change her oil, replace her spark plugs, and adjust her carburetor. Frank had given me a stack of classic car magazines along with the title, and I devoured every article about restoration and maintenance. On weekends, I'd drive out to the hill country, windows down, radio playing classic rock, feeling more alive than I'd ever felt sitting in some sterile office building. The Mustang drew attention wherever we went. People would approach me at gas stations, asking questions about her engine, her history, complimenting her condition. I'd beam with pride, talking about Frank and the love he'd put into keeping her perfect all those years, and how I was determined to continue that legacy. My apartment was small and sparse, but I'd framed a photo of the Mustang and hung it on my living room wall. When I had rough days at work, when deadlines were crushing me or office politics got overwhelming, I'd come home and just sit in her driver's seat for a few minutes, hands on the steering wheel, breathing in the scent of leather and chrome polish. It sounds silly now, but she made me feel capable, successful, like I was finally the person I'd always wanted to become. That's why what happened 6 months ago cut so deep. It wasn't just about losing a car. It was about having the thing I valued most in the world taken from me by the people who were supposed to protect it. It started on a Thursday morning in late September. I was getting ready for work when my phone buzzed with a text from my sister Emma. "Hey, can we talk? It's about the wedding." Emma was getting married to her boyfriend Tyler in December, and the planning had been consuming her life for months. Every conversation somehow circled back to centerpieces, catering menus, or dress fittings. I loved my sister, but the wedding talk was getting exhausting. I texted back that I was rushing to work but could call her that evening. She responded immediately with crying face emojis and the words, "It's really important, Jess. Like really, really important." I sighed, knowing that Emma's version of really important could mean anything from a genuine crisis to discovering that the florist was out of white roses. But there was something in her tone, even through text, that made me pause. Emma was dramatic, sure, but she wasn't usually manipulative. So I called her from my car before heading into the office. "Thank God," she said, when she answered, and I could hear genuine tears in her voice. "Jess, I don't know what to do. Tyler's been laid off." That stopped me cold. Tyler worked in construction, and while it wasn't the most stable industry, he'd been with the same company for 4 years and had always seemed secure. What happened? Budget cuts. They let go of 15 guys yesterday, including Tyler. He's been looking for work, but you know how it is. Nothing's going to pay what he was making, and we've already put down deposits on everything. The venue, the caterer, my dress. We're talking about $22,000, Jess. If we cancel now, we lose most of it. I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. Emma had always been the emotional one, the one who cried at commercials and got overwhelmed by big decisions. But this was different. This was real panic in her voice, the kind that comes when your whole future feels like it's crumbling. What about Tyler's unemployment benefits? And your savings? Unemployment won't kick in for weeks, and you know we spent everything on the house down payment last year. We've got maybe $3,000 in the bank, and that won't even cover rent for 2 months, let alone the wedding. I could see where this was heading, but I let her talk. Emma had been dreaming about her wedding since we were kids. She had scrapbooks full of magazine clippings, Pinterest boards with thousands of pins, and a vision board hanging in her bedroom with photos of the perfect dress, the perfect venue, the perfect flowers. This wasn't just a party to her. It was the culmination of every romantic dream she'd ever had. Mom and Dad are trying to help, she continued, but they don't have $20,000 lying around either. Dad's been talking about taking out a loan, but their credit isn't great since the medical bills from Mom's surgery last year. Our mom had needed gallbladder surgery the previous fall, and even with insurance, the bills had been brutal. My parents weren't poor, but they weren't wealthy either. Dad worked as a mechanic for the city, and Mom was a part-time receptionist at a dental office. They lived paycheck to paycheck like most people, and I knew the idea of taking on debt for a wedding was probably keeping them up at night. I'm really sorry, Em, that's incredibly stressful. But what exactly are you asking me? There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more careful. I know you've been saving money. I know you're really good with finances and planning, and I was wondering, maybe hoping, if there was any way you could help us out. Not as a gift, obviously. We'd pay you back as soon as Tyler finds work. I sat in my car, engine running, staring at the office building where I needed to be in 10 minutes for an important client meeting. Emma wasn't wrong about me being good with money. I'd always been the responsible one, the one who planned ahead and avoided debt. After buying the Mustang, I'd been rebuilding my savings account slowly but steadily. I had about $8,000 put away, money I was planning to use for a down payment on a house in a year or two. But $8,000 wouldn't solve Emma's problem, and $22,000 was more than I could even imagine lending to anyone, even family. Emma don't have that kind of money. I've got some savings, but nothing close to what you'd need for the full wedding. I know. But maybe even $5,000 or $6,000 would help. We could downsize some things, maybe find a cheaper caterer or a different venue. Anything would help, Jess. I'm desperate here. The desperation in her voice was real, and it tugged at something deep in my chest. Emma and I had always been close, despite our different personalities. She was the dreamer, I was the planner. She was emotional, I was logical. But we'd supported each other through everything, from childhood scraped knees to teenage heartbreaks to our parents' financial struggles. Let me think about it. I said finally. This is a huge decision, and I need to look at my finances and figure out what I can actually afford to do. Really? Oh my God, Jess, thank you so much for even considering it. You have no idea what this means to me. I could hear the relief flooding her voice, and part of me felt good about that. Part of me wanted to be the big sister who could swoop in and save the day. But a bigger part of me was already calculating numbers, trying to figure out how much I could reasonably lend without completely derailing my own financial plans. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, spreadsheets open, looking at every dollar I'd managed to save over the past year. The reality was stark. I could probably lend Emma $5,000 without putting myself in serious financial jeopardy, but it would mean starting over with my house savings, delaying my own dreams by at least a year. I called her back around 9 o'clock. I can do $5,000, I said. It's not the full amount you need, but it's what I can afford without putting myself in a bad position. Emma screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Are you serious? Oh my God, Jess, you're literally saving my wedding. You're saving my life. I love you so much. Her excitement was infectious, and I found myself smiling despite the anxiety gnawing at my stomach. We need to set up a payment plan, I said. I'm not trying to be a hard-ass, but this is a serious amount of money, and I need to know when I can expect to be paid back. Absolutely yes, whatever you want. Tyler's going to find work soon, I know he will. We can start paying you back by February, maybe sooner if he gets something good quickly. We worked out the details over the next few days. I would transfer the money to Emma's account by the end of the week, and they would pay me back at $300 a month starting in February. It wasn't ideal, but it felt manageable, and Emma's gratitude was overwhelming. She called me her hero, her guardian angel, the best sister in the world. My parents were thrilled when they heard about my decision. Mom cried happy tears and told me how proud she was to have raised such a generous, caring daughter. Dad clapped me on the shoulder and said I was doing the right thing, that family always comes first. Even Tyler, who could be awkward and distant sometimes, gave me a genuine hug and promised he'd pay me back with interest. For a few weeks, everything felt good. Emma's stress levels dropped dramatically, and she threw herself back into wedding planning with renewed enthusiasm. She'd send me photos of cake tastings and flower arrangements, always with messages like "Thank you again for making this possible, and I can't wait for you to see how beautiful everything turns out." But then November arrived, and things started to shift in ways I didn't see coming. It began with small comments from my parents. Little remarks about how generous I was being, how fortunate Emma was to have a sister who could help in such a big way. Not everyone has $26,000 just sitting around, my dad said one Sunday dinner, and I corrected him that it was $5,000, not 26. He laughed and said, "Still, that's a lot of money for most people." Then my mom started making comments about the Mustang. "Such a beautiful car," she'd say, running her hand along the fender when she visited. "Must be nice to have something so valuable just sitting in the driveway." At first I thought she was just admiring it, but there was something in her tone that made me uncomfortable. Emma's behavior changed too. The constant gratitude and effusive thank yous gradually faded, replaced by a kind of casual expectation. She'd make comments about needing to upgrade the flowers, or wanting to add a photo booth, always with the underlying assumption that somehow more money would materialize if the wedding needed it. "Tyler's been looking at jobs," she'd say, "but nothing that pays enough yet. We might need to push back that February start date for paying you back." I tried to be understanding. Job hunting was stressful, and the economy wasn't great. But something felt different about Emma's attitude, like the desperate, grateful sister from September had been replaced by someone who saw my help as an entitlement rather than a sacrifice. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in late November. I'd had a particularly long day at work, dealing with a difficult client who kept changing their requirements and demanding impossible deadlines. All I wanted was to go home, sit in my car for a few minutes, and let the stress of the day melt away. But when I pulled into my driveway, the Mustang wasn't there. I sat in my practical Honda Civic, staring at the empty space where my dream car should have been, feeling like I'd entered some kind of alternate reality. The Mustang was always there. She was the first thing I saw when I came home, the last thing I saw when I left for work in the morning. Her absence felt like a physical wound, a hole in my chest that made it hard to breathe. My first thought was theft. Someone had stolen my car. I fumbled for my phone to call the police, but then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was an oil stain on the driveway where the Mustang usually sat, but it was fresh. And there were tire tracks leading away from the house, not the kind of erratic marks you'd expect from a theft, but careful, deliberate tracks like someone had driven the car away normally. I called Emma first, not sure why, but feeling like I needed to talk to someone, anyone, who might help me make sense of what was happening. "Hey Jess, what's up?" she answered, but there was something weird in her voice. Something guilty. "Emma, something's wrong. My car is gone. Someone took my car." "What? That's terrible. Did you call the police?" But even as she was saying the words, something in her tone felt off, like she was reading from a script, performing surprise rather than feeling it. "I'm about to, but I wanted to check with you first, see if maybe Mom and Dad had borrowed it for some reason." There was a long pause, longer than there should have been for such a simple question. I don't think so, Emma said finally. But you should definitely call them. I hung up and immediately dialed my parents' house. My dad answered on the third ring.
Hey, sweetie.
How was work? Dad, where is my car? Another pause. Another too long silence that made my heart start racing. What do you mean? I mean my Mustang isn't in my driveway, and I want to know where it is.
Hey, sweetie.
Well, honey, we needed to talk to you about that. Why don't you come over for dinner tonight, and we can all sit down and discuss it? The casual way he said that made me feel like I was losing my mind. My $18,000 dream car was missing, and he was talking about it like we'd misplaced the remote control. Dad, I don't want to come over for dinner. I want to know where my car is. Right now. I heard him sigh, the kind of long-suffering sigh he used to make when I was a teenager, and he thought I was being unreasonable.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
We sold it, Jessica. We needed the money for Emma's wedding, and it seemed like the practical thing to do. The world tilted sideways. For a moment I couldn't process what he'd just said. The words didn't make sense, like he'd spoken in a foreign language. You what? We sold the Mustang. Frank Jenkins, the man you bought it from, he'd been asking around about buying it back. Turns out his grandson is getting married next spring, and Frank wanted to surprise him with it. He offered us $22,000, which is more than you paid for it. We figured you'd be happy about the profit. $22,000, the exact amount Emma needed for her wedding. You sold my car without asking me. Now Jessica, don't get upset. We're family. Emma needed help, and you've got that reliable Honda to get you to work. The Mustang was just sitting there most of the time anyway. It seemed selfish to keep something so valuable when your sister was in crisis. Selfish. The word hit me like a slap. I was selfish for wanting to keep the car I'd worked 2 years to afford. The car I'd bought with my own money. The car that was titled in my name and registered to my address. Where is the money? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Well, we gave it to Emma, of course. For the wedding. You should be proud, honey. You're helping your sister have the perfect day she's always dreamed of. I hung up the phone. I sat in my Honda, in my empty driveway, shaking with a rage so pure and complete that I couldn't form words. They had stolen my car. Not borrowed it, not asked to sell it, but literally taken it from my property and sold it while I was at work, then handed the money to my sister like it was theirs to give. My phone started buzzing immediately, Dad calling back, probably to lecture me about hanging up on him. I declined the call. Then Emma calling, probably to manage the situation with fake sympathy and manipulation. I declined that call too. Instead I called Frank Jenkins. Jessica, he said, sounding genuinely happy to hear from me. How's that beautiful Mustang treating you? Frank, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you buy my car today? There was confusion in his voice when he answered. Buy it back, you mean? Well, yes, your father called me last week and said you were interested in selling. Said you needed the money for your sister's wedding, and thought I might want first dibs. I've got to admit, I was thrilled to get her back. My father had been planning this for a week. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision or crisis response. He'd contacted Frank, negotiated the sale, and arranged the pickup, all without saying a single word to me. Frank, I want you to understand something very clearly. I never agreed to sell that car. My parents took it from my driveway and sold it without my knowledge or permission. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Jessica, are you telling me your parents stole your car? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Frank's voice changed completely, became hard and serious in a way I'd never heard before. Son of a bitch. I'm sorry, honey, excuse the language, but this is a mess. A real mess. I've already signed the title transfer and paid your father the money. But if what you're saying is true, then I've unknowingly participated in theft. It's not your fault, Frank. You had no reason to think my parents would do something like this. What do you want to do? I can sell her back to you for what I paid, but I'm guessing if your parents were desperate enough to steal your car, you don't have $22,000 lying around. He was right. The $5,000 I'd lent Emma had been most of my savings, and the rest was tied up in my retirement account and emergency fund. Even if I could access it, Buying back my own stolen car would wipe out everything I'd worked for. I need to think about this, Frank. This is all happening so fast. Of course, take all the time you need. But Jessica, I want you to know, if there's any way to make this right, I will. That car belongs with someone who loves her, and it's clear that's you, not some old man who already had his time with her. I thanked Frank and hung up, then sat in the gathering darkness, trying to figure out what to do next. My phone was buzzing constantly now. Calls and texts from my parents, from Emma, all of them probably panicking that their perfect plan was falling apart. But I wasn't ready to talk to them yet. I needed to understand exactly what had happened, and more importantly, I needed to figure out who I was really dealing with. Because the people who had raised me, the parents who had taught me about honesty and respect, and working hard for what you want, those people wouldn't have stolen my car. Which meant I'd been living with strangers my whole life, and I was just now finding out who they really were. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I'd barely slept, and I knew there was no way I could sit through meetings and pretend everything was normal when my entire world had been turned upside down. Instead, I drove to my parents' house in my Honda, feeling strange and disconnected in the car that now represented my only transportation option. They were waiting for me. I could see them through the living room window, my mom pacing back and forth, while my dad sat in his recliner, probably rehearsing whatever speech they'd prepared to justify what they'd done. Emma's car was in the driveway too, which meant this was going to be a family meeting. A chance for them to gang up on me, to make me feel guilty for being upset about losing the thing I valued most in the world. I didn't knock. I used my key, and walked straight into the living room, where all three of them turned to look at me, with expressions ranging from defensive to guilty to artificially sympathetic. Jessica, honey, my mom started, we need to talk about this situation. You can't just hang up on your father when he's trying to explain something important. There's nothing to explain, I said, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. You stole my car and sold it. That's theft, and it's a felony. My dad stood up from his chair, his face already flushing red the way it did when he felt challenged. Now you wait just a minute, young lady. We did not steal anything. We made a difficult decision for the good of this family. Sometimes being an adult means making sacrifices for the people you love. Sacrifices of other people's property. Emma jumped in, tears already starting to flow down her cheeks. Jess, please don't be like this. I know you're upset, but we can work this out. The important thing is that we're all family, and we need to stick together. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and tried to find the person I'd grown up with. The Emma I knew was dramatic and emotional, but she wasn't cruel. She wouldn't have participated in stealing from me. But here she was, sitting in my parents' living room, benefiting from the sale of my car, and asking me not to be like this about having my property stolen. Emma, did you know they were going to sell my car? She looked away, which was answer enough, but my mom jumped in before Emma could respond. We all talked about it. Yes, we're a family, Jessica. We make decisions together, especially when they affect everyone. This decision didn't affect everyone. It affected me. It was my car, bought with my money, sitting on my property, and none of you had any right to touch it. My father's voice was getting louder now, taking on the authoritative tone he'd used when I was a child, and he wanted to end an argument through sheer volume. That car was just sitting there being selfish, while your sister was in crisis. You've already got a perfectly good vehicle to get around in. Emma needed that money for her future, for her happiness. What kind of sister are you to put a car before your family? The manipulation was so obvious, so perfectly executed, that I almost admired it. They'd taken my property, sold it without my consent, given the money to someone else, and now they were making me the villain for being upset about it. What kind of parents steal from their own child? My mom started crying then, not the theatrical tears Emma was famous for, but genuine sobs that shook her whole body. How can you say that to us? After everything we've done for you, after raising you and supporting you and loving you, you're going to stand there and call us thieves, because that's what you are. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. I'd never spoken to my parents that way. Never been so direct and harsh, but I'd also never had them steal $18,000 worth of property from me. Emma stood up and put her arm around Mom, shooting me a look that was pure anger, disguised as disappointment. This isn't like you, Jess. I don't know what's happened to make you so cold, but this isn't the sister I know. The sister I know would understand that sometimes we have to help each other, even when it's hard. The sister you know just lent you $5,000 for your wedding. The sister you know has been helping this family financially for years. The sister you know worked for 2 years to afford that car, and she didn't deserve to have it stolen from her driveway. My dad was pacing now, running his hands through his hair in frustration. Fine, you want to play the victim, go ahead, but that money is already spent, Jessica. The deposits are paid, the venue is booked, the dress is bought. What exactly do you want us to do? Cancel Emma's wedding, ruin her entire future because you're having a tantrum about a car. A tantrum. He was calling my reaction to having my car stolen a tantrum. I want you to give me back my money. We don't have it, Emma said quickly. It's all tied up in wedding expenses. Even if we wanted to pay you back right now, we couldn't. Then cancel the wedding. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sounds from outside seemed to disappear, leaving us in a bubble of shocked quiet. My mom stopped crying. My dad stopped pacing. Emma's mouth fell open like I'd suggested burning down the church. You can't be serious, Emma whispered. I'm completely serious. You stole $22,000 from me. If you can't pay it back, then you need to cancel the things you bought with stolen money, and get refunds. Emma's tears dried up instantly, replaced by a fury I'd never seen from her before. You're asking me to destroy my entire future because you're mad about a car. A car, Jessica. It's just a thing, but this is my wedding. This is the most important day of my entire life. And that Mustang was the most important thing in my entire life. But apparently, that doesn't matter to any of you. My father stepped between Emma and me, his face red with anger and his voice shaking. That's enough. You're being selfish and dramatic, and you're hurting your family over something that doesn't matter in the long run. Cars can be replaced, Jessica. Family can't. You're right, I said, looking at each of them in turn. Family can't be replaced. Too bad I'm just now finding out that I don't actually have one. I walked out of their house, and didn't look back. The drive home was surreal. I kept expecting to see the Mustang in my driveway, kept thinking this was all some terrible dream that I'd wake up from. But the empty space was real, and so was the hollow feeling in my chest, where my trust in my family used to be. I spent the rest of the day researching my legal options. Theft of property worth more than $20,000 was a felony in Texas. I could file a police report, press charges, and potentially see my own parents and sister arrested. The thought made me sick, but not as sick as the realization that they'd stolen from me and felt completely justified in doing it. My phone buzzed constantly throughout the day, texts from Emma begging me to reconsider, to think about what I was doing to the family. Messages from my parents, alternating between anger and guilt trips, telling me I was overreacting and then pleading with me to understand their position. But the message that broke my heart came at 9 o'clock that night, from my mom. We raised you better than this, Jessica. I don't know what happened to the loving, generous daughter we used to have, but this person you've become is someone I don't recognize. You're choosing material things over family, and that's not how we taught you to live. If you can't see past your own selfishness to help your sister in her time of need, then maybe it's better if we all take some time apart. She was disowning me for being upset about them stealing my car. I read the message 3 times, then set my phone aside and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to let them rewrite this story. I wasn't going to let them paint me as the villain while they played the victims. Tomorrow I was going to start fighting back. And I was going to find out exactly what my sister had really said about our parents, when she thought I wasn't listening, because something told me there was more to this story than a desperate bride and well-meaning parents making a hard choice. Something told me I'd been played from the very beginning, and it was time to find out just how deep the betrayal went. I woke up the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The hurt was still there, sharp and constant, but underneath it was something harder: determination. For the first time since this nightmare began, I knew exactly what I needed to do.
First, I called my boss and explained that I was dealing with a family emergency and would need to work from home for the rest of the week. Sarah, my manager, was understanding. She'd always been supportive, and I'd built up enough goodwill over the years that taking a few days wasn't going to be a problem. Then I started making the calls I should have made the night before. The Austin Police Department's non-emergency line connected me to Officer Martinez, who listened patiently as I explained the situation. When I finished, there was a pause before he spoke. "Ma'am, I want to make sure I understand this correctly. Your parents took your vehicle from your property without permission and sold it to a third party?" "That's correct. And the vehicle was titled in your name." "Yes, I have all the paperwork." "Then what you're describing is theft of a motor vehicle, which is a felony in the state of Texas. The value you mentioned puts it in the first-degree category, which carries serious penalties." Hearing it stated so matter-of-factly by a police officer made the reality sink in even deeper. My parents hadn't just made a questionable family decision, they'd committed a serious crime. "I'd like to file a report," I said. "I can take an initial report over the phone, but you'll need to come in to sign the paperwork and provide documentation. Can you be here this afternoon?" I scheduled the appointment for 2 o'clock, then spent the morning gathering every piece of paperwork related to the Mustang. The original title, registration, insurance documents, photos of the car, receipts for maintenance work, even the bank statements showing the $18,000 payment to Frank when I'd bought her. By the time I walked into the police station, I had a complete file that painted a clear picture of ownership. Officer Martinez was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd dealt with family disputes before, but when he reviewed my documentation, his expression grew serious. "This is pretty cut and dried," he said, making copies of everything. "Your parents don't have a leg to stand on legally. The question is whether you want to pursue this. Once we file charges, this becomes a criminal matter. There's no taking it back." I thought about my mom's text from the night before, about being disowned for choosing material things over family, about my dad calling my reaction a tantrum, about Emma sitting in that living room, benefiting from stolen money while painting me as the villain for being upset about it. "File the charges," Officer Martinez nodded and handed me a case number. "We'll need to interview the other parties involved. Your parents will likely be contacted within the next few days. I have to warn you, family theft cases can get ugly fast. They're going to be angry, and they're going to blame you for escalating things. They can't blame me any more than they already do." After leaving the police station, I drove to Frank Jenkins' house. He was working in his garage when I pulled up, and his face lit up with genuine pleasure when he saw me. "Jessica, how are you holding up, honey?" "I'm doing better now that I'm taking action. Frank, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, when my father called you about selling the car, what exactly did he say?" Frank wiped his hands on a shop rag and leaned against his workbench. "Well, he said you were in a tight spot financially. That your sister was getting married and needed money for the wedding, and you'd decided to sell the Mustang to help her out. He said you were too embarrassed to call me yourself because you knew how much I'd loved that car, so you'd asked him to reach out." Another layer of the lie revealed itself. My father hadn't just stolen my car, he'd crafted an elaborate story to make Frank believe I was willingly selling it. He'd used my supposed embarrassment as cover for why I wasn't involved in the conversation directly. "Did he say anything else?" Frank's expression grew uncomfortable. "He mentioned that you were having some money troubles at work. Said your company might be doing layoffs and you were trying to get ahead of it financially. I felt bad for you, to be honest. Thought maybe you were making a smart decision, even though it had to hurt to let her go." The manipulation was breathtaking in its completeness. My father had created a narrative where I was the one in crisis, making a difficult but responsible choice to help my family. Frank had no reason to question it, and probably felt like he was helping me by paying a fair price for the car. Frank, none of that was true. I'm not having money problems, my job is secure, and I never wanted to sell that car. My father made up that entire story. Frank's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, anger, then a deep sadness. "Your own father lied to me about you being in trouble just so he could steal your car. That's exactly what happened." "Son of a bitch," Frank muttered, then caught himself. "Sorry, honey, but this is beyond messed up. What can I do to help?" We spent the next hour talking through options. Frank offered to sell the car back to me at cost, but we both knew I couldn't afford $22,000 without destroying my financial future. He also offered to testify if the case went to court, which was more valuable than he probably realized. "That car belongs with you," Frank said as I was leaving.
I don't know how we're going to make it happen, but we'll figure something out. Driving home, I felt better than I had since this whole mess started. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this. I had documentation, I had witnesses, and I had the law on my side. But more importantly, I had Frank, who understood what the Mustang meant and was willing to help me get justice. My phone had been buzzing all day with calls and texts from my family, but I'd ignored them. I wasn't ready to deal with their manipulation and guilt trips while I was trying to build my case. But when I got home, there was a car in my driveway that made my heart sink. Emma's Honda was parked where the Mustang should have been. I sat in my car for a moment, considering my options. I could drive away, go get dinner somewhere, and come back later when she was gone. But running away wasn't going to solve anything, and part of me was curious to see what new manipulation tactic they'd come up with. Emma was sitting on my front porch when I walked up to the house. She'd been crying, her mascara smudged and her hair disheveled in a way that looked almost too perfect, like she'd arranged it for maximum sympathy. "Jess, thank God you're home. We need to talk." "No, we don't." I walked past her to unlock my front door, but she stood up and grabbed my arm. "Please, just 5 minutes. I know you're angry, but there are things you don't understand about what's been happening with Mom and Dad." Something in her tone made me pause. It wasn't her usual dramatic pleading. There was something else there, something that sounded almost like guilt. "What things?" Emma looked around nervously, like she was afraid someone might be watching. "Not out here. Can we go inside?" Against my better judgment, I let her in. Emma had never been to my apartment when she had an agenda before, and I was curious to see what this was about. She sat on my couch and immediately started crying again, but these tears seemed more genuine than the ones from yesterday. "Jess, I need to tell you something, and you're going to hate me for it." "I already hate you for it. You participated in stealing my car." "That's just it though. I didn't know they were going to take it. I swear to God I had no idea what they were planning." I sat down across from her, staying far enough away that she couldn't grab my hands or try any other physical manipulation. "Explain." Emma took a shaky breath. 2 weeks ago, Mom and Dad asked me to come over for dinner. They said they wanted to talk about the wedding budget and see if there was anything we could cut to make it more affordable. I thought they were being helpful. We went through all the expenses and Dad kept shaking his head and saying how much money it was. He kept asking if there was anyone in the family who might be able to help, anyone with savings or assets that could be liquidated. I mentioned that you'd already lent us $5,000 and that you'd been saving for years. You told them about my savings. I didn't think it was a secret. I was proud of you, Jess. I told them how responsible you were, how you'd managed to save up enough to buy that car outright, how you were already building up your savings again for a house. I could see where this was going, and my stomach was starting to twist with dread. Then Mom got this look on her face, and she said something like, "Well, Jessica does have that expensive car just sitting in her driveway. I wonder what something like that is worth." "And you didn't think that was a red flag?" Emma's tears were flowing freely now. I thought she was just thinking out loud. People say stuff like that all the time. I didn't think she was planning anything. Then Dad started asking questions about the car. What year it was, what condition it was, and whether you'd ever mentioned wanting to sell it. "What did you tell them?" "The truth, that you loved that car more than anything, that you spent every weekend working on it, that you'd never sell it unless you absolutely had to." I thought that would be the end of it. But it hadn't been the end of it. It had been the beginning of their plan. "When did you find out what they were going to do?" Emma's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Monday night, the day before they sold it. Dad called me and said they'd figured out a way to help with the wedding. He said you'd agreed to sell the Mustang, but you were too emotional about it to handle the details yourself, so they were going to take care of everything. And you believed that." I wanted to believe it. I was desperate, Jess. Tyler still doesn't have a job, and I was starting to panic about the wedding. When Dad said you'd agreed to help, I was so relieved I didn't ask questions I should have asked. Emma buried her face in her hands, sobbing harder than I'd ever seen her cry. "I should have called you. I should have checked with you directly, but Dad said you were stressed about it and didn't want to talk about it until it was done. He said surprising you with how much money they got for it would make you feel better about the decision." The pieces were falling into place now. My parents hadn't just stolen my car, they'd manipulated Emma into believing I'd consented to it.
They'd used her desperation and her trust to make her complicit in their crime, without her realizing what was happening. Emma, did you ever question any of this? Even for a second? She looked up at me, her face blotchy and swollen from crying. Tuesday morning, when Dad called to say they'd sold it for $22,000, I got excited and wanted to call you right away to thank you. But he said to wait, that you needed time to process everything. That's when I started to wonder if something was wrong. But you didn't call me. I was scared. If you really had agreed to sell the car, then calling would make it seem like I didn't trust you. And if you hadn't agreed, then calling would reveal that I knew about it beforehand. I was trapped, and I didn't know what to do. Emma reached for my hands, but I pulled them away. I know I should have done something. I know I should have warned you or called you or refused to take the money. But I was so scared of losing the wedding, and I convinced myself that maybe you really had agreed to it. Maybe you were just being generous in a way I didn't understand. Right up until I showed up at Mom and Dad's house yesterday. Right up until then, she admitted. When you walked in and started talking about theft, I knew they'd lied to me, and I knew I'd been part of something terrible without meaning to be. I studied my sister's face, trying to decide if this was another manipulation or if she was telling the truth. Emma had always been dramatic, but she'd never been a good liar. The guilt and shame in her expression seemed genuine, and her story explained some of the things that had been bothering me about yesterday's confrontation. Why are you telling me this now? Emma wiped her nose with a tissue from her purse. Because I went home last night and told Tyler everything. He was furious. Not at you, at me. He said I'd helped our parents steal from you, and it didn't matter whether I knew what was happening or not. He said if I didn't make this right, he was going to call off the wedding himself. That surprised me. Tyler had always seemed like a passive guy, the type to go along with whatever Emma wanted, but apparently he had stronger moral convictions than I'd given him credit for. He said he couldn't marry someone who would take stolen money from her own sister, even if she didn't know it was stolen at the time. He said the right thing to do was give you back every penny, and figure out how to pay for the wedding ourselves. And what do you think? Emma was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, her expression was different. Less dramatic, more adult. I think Tyler's right. I think I've been so focused on having the perfect wedding that I forgot about being a decent person, and I think Mom and Dad are not who I thought they were. That last part caught my attention. What do you mean? After Tyler laid into me last night, I started thinking about everything that had happened. Really thinking, not just reacting emotionally. And I realized there were things that didn't make sense.
Emma shifted on the couch, getting more comfortable, like she was settling in for a long conversation. Like how calm they were when you confronted them yesterday. Normal people who just found out their daughter was upset about something would be apologetic, right? They'd be trying to fix the problem, not attacking you for having the problem. She was right. My parents' response had been pure offense. No defense, no acknowledgement that they might have made a mistake, no attempt to understand my perspective. Just immediate blame and anger directed at me for daring to be upset. And the way they had all the answers ready, Emma continued. It wasn't like they were making decisions in the moment. They had their story prepared, their justifications lined up, like they'd been planning what to say if you found out. They had been planning it. They contacted Frank a week before they took the car. Emma's eyes widened. A week? They were planning this for a week and didn't say anything to me until the night before. Frank told me the whole story. Dad created this elaborate lie about me being in financial trouble, and too embarrassed to contact Frank directly, he made it sound like selling the car was my idea. Oh my God! Emma put her hand over her mouth. Jess, that's so much worse than I thought. They didn't just steal your car. They planned it out and lied to multiple people to make it happen. Now you're getting it. Emma was quiet again, but I could see her mind working, processing the implications of what we'd just discussed. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Harder? There's something else I need to tell you. Something I overheard them talking about after you left yesterday. My attention sharpened. What? They were in the kitchen and I was in the living room putting on my coat to leave. I don't think they realized I could hear them. Mom was upset, crying about how ungrateful you were being. But Dad wasn't upset. He was angry. Angry about what? Emma's voice dropped to almost a whisper.
He said you were being dramatic and that you'd get over it once you realized you didn't have any other choice. He said family always comes first, and you'd figure that out eventually. That doesn't sound particularly shocking. That's not the bad part. The bad part was what he said next. Emma looked directly at me, and I could see fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of what she was about to reveal. He said if you kept making trouble, they'd have to take more serious steps to protect the family. He said you'd always been too independent for your own good, and maybe it was time you learned what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. A chill ran down my spine. What does that mean? I don't know, but Mom got really quiet after he said it. Like she knew what he was talking about, but she didn't want to discuss it where I might hear. Did they say anything else? Emma nodded reluctantly. Dad said something about how you think you're so smart with your job and your savings and your independence. But family has ways of bringing people back in line. He said you'd learn that lesson one way or another. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. My parents weren't just angry about my reaction to the theft. They were planning to escalate if I didn't fall in line and accept what they'd done. Emma, I need you to understand something. I filed a police report today. Your parents are going to be contacted about criminal charges for stealing my car. Emma's face went white. Criminal charges, like arrested. Like arrested, yes. Theft of a motor vehicle worth more than $20,000 is a felony. Oh my God, Jess, what have we done? You haven't done anything. They did this. They chose to steal from me, and now they're going to face the consequences. Emma started crying again, but these were different tears. Not the manipulative dramatic sobs from earlier, but the quiet shocked tears of someone realizing their world was about to change completely. What happens now? Now we wait and see how they react when the police contact them. Based on what you just told me about their conversation yesterday, I don't think they're going to take responsibility quietly. Emma looked at me with something that might have been respect. You're not backing down, are you? Not a chance. She nodded slowly. Good. Tyler was right. Someone needs to stand up to them, and if it has to be you alone, then at least you won't be completely alone. What do you mean? Emma reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I can't give you back all the money right now because most of it's already been spent on deposits. But Tyler and I talked, and we want to do what we can to make this right. She handed me the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $5,000. It's not nearly enough, but it's what we had in our savings account. Tyler insisted. He said he'd rather call off the wedding than start our marriage with stolen money. I stared at the check, genuinely surprised. $5,000 wasn't going to solve my problem, but it was a gesture that meant more than the money itself. Emma was choosing to do the right thing, even though it was going to make her life more difficult. Emma, are you sure about this? This is your wedding money. It was never my money to begin with. It was yours and Mom and Dad stole it. I can't undo what they did, but I can at least return the part that I'm able to return. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt a flicker of hope that my relationship with Emma might be salvageable. She was making a choice to side with what was right instead of what was easy, and that meant something. What are you going to do about the wedding? Emma sighed. We're going to downsize. A lot, maybe find a cheaper venue. Cut the guest list, simplify everything. It won't be the dream wedding I planned, but Tyler said something yesterday that really stuck with me. What? He said he'd rather marry me in a courthouse with 10 people who actually cared about us than have a fancy party paid for with stolen money. He's right. I lost sight of what was actually important. Emma stood up to leave, but paused at the door. Jess, there's one more thing. When the police contact Mom and Dad, they're going to blame you for ruining the family. They're going to say you chose money over relationships, that you're selfish and vindictive. I'm prepared for that. I know you are, but I want you to know that not all of us believe it. Tyler and I are on your side, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. After Emma left, I sat on my couch holding the $5,000 check and thinking about everything she'd told me. The picture that was emerging was worse than simple theft. My parents had planned this carefully, manipulated multiple people to make it happen,
and were now threatening further retaliation if I didn't accept their actions quietly. But Emma's visit had also shown me something important. The family dynamics I'd grown up with, where my parents' word was law and questioning them was forbidden, were starting to break down. Emma was beginning to see them for who they really were, and that gave me hope that I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. My phone rang around 9 o'clock. The caller ID showed my parents' house number, but when I answered it was my father's voice I heard, and he was angrier than I'd ever heard him. "Jessica, what the hell have you done?" "Hello to you too, Dad. Don't get smart with me. The police just left here. They said you filed charges against us for theft." "Your own parents, Jessica. You called the police on your own parents. You stole my car. What did you think was going to happen?" "We didn't steal anything. We made a family decision to help your sister, and you're turning it into some kind of crime because you can't see past your own selfishness." The casual way he dismissed what they'd done was breathtaking. Even now, faced with criminal charges, he was sticking to the story that they were the victims. "Dad, you took my car from my driveway, without asking me, sold it to someone else, and kept the money. That's the definition of theft. That's the definition of family, helping family. But apparently you don't understand what family means anymore." In the background I could hear my mother crying and saying something about how they'd raised an ungrateful daughter. The victim act was in full swing. The police officer said, "These charges could result in prison time, Jessica." "Prison? Are you really willing to send your own parents to prison over a car?" "I'm willing to hold my parents accountable for committing a felony, yes." "Fine. You want to play hardball. We can play hardball, but don't think this ends here. You've made your choice, and now we'll make ours." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Is that supposed to scare me? It should, because you're about to find out what happens when you turn your back on family. And trust me, Jessica, you're not going to like it. He hung up without another word, leaving me with the dial tone and the distinct feeling that the real battle was just beginning. I'd thought filing the police report would be the end of it, that my parents would face the consequences of their actions, and we'd all move on with our lives. But Dad's phone call made it clear that they had no intention of accepting responsibility or backing down. If anything, they were doubling down on their position and preparing to escalate the conflict. The question was, how far were they willing to go to avoid accountability for what they'd done? I was about to find out. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was drinking coffee and checking emails when my doorbell rang at 7:30. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged with graying hair and a kind face, holding what looked like official papers. "Miss Peterson, I'm Detective Sarah Chen, with the Austin Police Department. I was hoping we could talk about the case you filed yesterday." I invited her in, grateful that the police were taking this seriously enough to send a detective. Detective Chen had the calm professional demeanor of someone who'd dealt with family crimes before. But there was something in her expression that suggested this case was more complicated than a simple theft. "I've reviewed Officer Martinez's report and the documentation you provided," she said, settling into my living room chair. "Everything appears straightforward from a legal standpoint. Your parents committed felony theft, and we have sufficient evidence to pursue charges. But I wanted to speak with you directly, because there are some developments you should know about." My stomach tightened. "What kind of developments?" "Your parents have retained an attorney. A fairly expensive one, actually. They're claiming this is a family dispute that's been blown out of proportion, and they're prepared to fight the charges aggressively." That surprised me. My parents lived paycheck to paycheck. Where had they gotten the money for an expensive lawyer? "There's more," Detective Chen continued. "They've also filed a restraining order request against you, claiming you've been harassing and threatening them since the incident." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's completely false. I haven't contacted them, except to respond when they called me. I figured as much based on your demeanor and the evidence. But they're claiming you've made threatening phone calls, sent harassing texts, and even drove by their house multiple times in what they're calling stalking behavior." The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Not only were they trying to avoid responsibility for stealing from me, but they were actively trying to paint me as the aggressor. Detective, I can show you my phone records, my location data, anything you need. I haven't done any of those things. I believe you, and will be looking into their claims thoroughly. But I wanted you to be prepared for what's coming. This isn't going to be a simple case where they admit wrongdoing and accept consequences. They're playing dirty, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. Detective Chen pulled out a notebook and flipped through several pages. There's something else. We interviewed the buyer, Frank Jenkins, yesterday. He corroborated your story completely and provided additional information that strengthens your case. What kind of information? He recorded the phone conversation with your father.
Apparently, he's been burned in car deals before, and has gotten into the habit of recording all negotiations for his own protection. The recording clearly shows your father representing himself as acting on your behalf and making specific false claims about your financial situation. This was better news than I'd expected. Having Frank's testimony was valuable, but having actual recorded evidence of my father's lies was potentially case-changing. The recording also captures your father coaching Frank on what to say if you contacted him directly. He told Frank to tell you that the sale was already final and couldn't be reversed, and to emphasize how much money you'd made on the transaction. More evidence of premeditation. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision or a family emergency response. My parents had planned every aspect of the theft, including how to manage my reaction when I discovered it. Where does this leave the criminal case? Detective Chen closed her notebook and looked at me directly. Honestly, you have an excellent case. The evidence is overwhelming. The dollar amount puts this in serious felony territory, and your parents' attempts to manipulate the situation afterward actually strengthen your position. Any prosecutor would be confident taking this to trial. But family cases are always complicated. The defense attorney is going to paint this as a family dispute, emphasize that the money went to your sister's wedding rather than being pocketed for personal gain, and try to generate sympathy for your parents as well-meaning grandparents-to-be who made a poor decision in a moment of desperation. I understood what she was getting at. Legally, I had a strong case, but emotionally and politically, prosecuting my own parents was going to be difficult in ways that had nothing to do with the law. What do you recommend? That depends on what you want out of this. If you want justice and full accountability, we pursue the criminal charges regardless of how messy it gets. If you want your money back and a resolution that doesn't involve sending your parents to prison, we might consider whether they're willing to negotiate a settlement. Have they indicated any willingness to return the money? Detective Chen's expression told me everything I needed to know before she spoke. Their attorney made it very clear that they consider the money spent for a worthy cause and have no intention of returning it. In fact, they're maintaining that they had implied permission to sell the car based on your previous financial assistance to your sister. Implied permission. I explicitly told them I couldn't afford to help beyond the $5,000 I already lent Emma. I know, and we have evidence of that. But they're arguing that your willingness to help your sister financially demonstrated a family commitment that extended to your assets. It's a weak legal argument, but they're hoping to muddy the waters enough to create reasonable doubt. I sat back in my chair, trying to process the full scope of what my parents were doing. They weren't just refusing to take responsibility for their actions, they were actively attacking my character and attempting to justify theft through a twisted interpretation of family loyalty. Detective, what would happen if I dropped the charges? They'd walk away with your money and face no consequences for what they did. And based on their behavior so far, I'd guess they'd interpret your backing down as validation of their actions. Meaning they might do something like this again. It's possible. People who commit crimes and face no consequences often escalate their behavior over time. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Detective Chen explaining the legal process and timeline. The case would likely take several months to work through the system, during which my parents would continue trying to undermine my credibility and justify their actions. After she left, I called Emma to update her on the situation. She listened quietly as I explained about the expensive attorney and the restraining order request, but I could hear her getting angrier as the conversation progressed. "This is insane," she said finally. "They stole your car, and now they're trying to make you look like the bad guy for reporting it. That seems to be the plan. Jessica, there's something I need to tell you, something I found out last night. Emma's tone had changed, become more serious. Tyler and I went over to their house to try to talk them into returning your money voluntarily. We thought maybe if we explained how wrong this was, they'd do the right thing. I'm guessing that didn't go well. It was a disaster. Dad started yelling the moment we brought it up, saying we were being manipulated by you and that families should stick together. But Mom said something that made everything click into place. Emma paused, and I could hear her taking a deep breath before continuing. She said they'd been planning this for months. Not just the car, Jessica, they'd been looking for ways to access your money for Emma's wedding since the engagement was announced last year. My blood ran cold. What do you mean planning this for months? Mom said they'd considered asking you for a loan directly, but they knew you'd want a formal repayment plan and might not lend them the full amount they needed. So they started looking for other options. Other options like stealing from me. They talked about taking out a loan using your car as collateral, but they couldn't do that without your signature. They considered asking you to co-sign for them, but again you'd want to know all the details and might refuse. Emma's voice was shaking with anger and disgust. Mom actually said they thought about having Dad borrow the car and getting into an accident so the insurance would pay out, but they were worried the insurance company would investigate too thoroughly. The premeditation was staggering. My parents hadn't just stolen my car in a moment of desperation. They'd spent months planning different ways to access my assets, and theft had been the solution they'd settled on as most likely to succeed. There's more, Jess. When Tyler asked them how they could afford the expensive lawyer, Dad got this smug look on his face and said they'd figured out how to finance it. Please tell me they didn't. They took out a loan using their house as collateral. $25,000. But here's the thing, they didn't take out $25,000 to pay for legal fees. They took out $25,000 because they're planning to disappear. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Disappear. Mom let it slip that they've been looking at houses in other states. Dad's been applying for jobs in Arizona and Nevada, places where they think you won't be able to pursue the criminal case as easily. They weren't just fighting the charges, they were preparing to flee the jurisdiction to avoid facing consequences. Emma, you need to report this to Detective Chen immediately. If they're planning to leave the state, that could be considered flight risk, and the court might be willing to restrict their travel. I already called the police station this morning. They said they'd look into it. Emma was quiet for a moment before speaking again. Jess, I owe you an apology that goes way beyond the car. I've been blind to who our parents really are, and I've been enabling their behavior my whole life without realizing it. What do you mean? I mean this isn't the first time they've done something like this. It's just the first time they got caught. Emma went on to explain a pattern of behavior that I'd somehow missed over the years. Small thefts from relatives, manipulation of elderly family members, lies told to obtain money or favors from friends and neighbors. Our parents had been operating this way for years, but they'd been careful to target people who wouldn't fight back, or who could be silenced through family pressure. Why didn't I see this before? I asked, because they were careful never to target you directly, and because I was always too focused on my own drama to pay attention to what was happening around me. But Tyler sees things differently than we do. He grew up in a family where people were held accountable for their actions, so when I told him stories about our parents that I thought were normal, he recognized them as red flags. The conversation with Emma continued for over an hour, during which she revealed detail after detail about our parents' manipulative and dishonest behavior. By the time we hung up, I had a completely different understanding of the people who had raised me. They weren't good people who had made a bad decision in a moment of crisis. They were people who had been making bad decisions consistently for years, and who had simply gotten better at hiding it over time. That afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a professional female voice introduced herself as Linda Morrison, attorney for my parents. Miss Peterson, I'm calling to see if we might be able to resolve this matter without the expense and emotional trauma of a protracted legal battle. I'm listening. My clients are prepared to offer a compromise. They'll return the original amount you paid for the vehicle, $18,000, in exchange for you dropping all criminal charges and signing a non-disclosure agreement. The offer was insulting on multiple levels. They were offering to return only the amount I'd originally paid, not the $22,000 they'd received from Frank.
and they wanted me to sign an NDA to prevent me from talking about what they'd done. Miss Morrison, your client stole a car worth $22,000. Why would I accept 18? The difference represents the profit you would have made on the sale, which my clients argue should be considered compensation for the emotional distress this situation has caused your sister. The twisted logic was breathtaking. They were claiming that the $4,000 difference was payment for the emotional distress they had caused Emma by stealing from me. That's ridiculous, and you know it. Miss Morrison's tone remained professionally neutral. Miss Peterson, I think you should carefully consider the personal and financial costs of pursuing this matter through the criminal justice system. Criminal trials are expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. Even if you win, there's no guarantee you'll recover any money, as my clients may not have assets available for restitution. Are you saying your clients spent the $25,000 they borrowed against their house? There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'm saying that civil recovery can be complicated, and you might find that a guaranteed settlement now is preferable to an uncertain outcome later. The threat was subtle but clear. My parents had hidden or spent the money in ways that would make it difficult for me to recover, even if I won the criminal case. Miss Morrison, please convey to your clients that I'm not interested in any settlement that doesn't involve full restitution and acknowledgement of wrongdoing. I'll pass along your response, but I'd encourage you to reconsider. My clients are prepared to fight these charges vigorously, and the discovery process may reveal information about your family relationships that you'd prefer to keep private. Now the gloves were really coming off. They were threatening to air personal family information in court as a way to pressure me into backing down. Is that a threat? It's simply a reality of the legal process. Family disputes that become criminal matters often involve testimony about personal relationships, financial arrangements, and private conversations that can be embarrassing for all parties involved. After I hung up with the attorney, I sat in my apartment thinking about everything that had happened over the past week. My parents had stolen from me, lied to multiple people to cover it up, hired an expensive attorney with borrowed money, filed false accusations against me, and were now threatening to flee the state and hide assets to avoid accountability. At every step, when given the opportunity to do the right thing, they'd chosen to escalate and double down on their bad behavior. But they'd also made a critical mistake. By involving Emma in their planning and revealing the extent of their deception, they'd created a witness who could testify to their premeditation and ongoing pattern of dishonest behavior. I called Detective Chen and updated her on both conversations. She listened carefully, taking notes, and when I finished, her response was immediate. Miss Peterson, your parents have just made this case much easier to prosecute. The loan application, the job applications in other states, the attorney's threats, and your sister's testimony about their long-term planning all strengthen your position significantly. What's the next step? We're going to request that the court consider your parents a flight risk and potentially restrict their travel. We're also going to expedite the investigation to prevent them from disposing of more assets or leaving the jurisdiction. How long will that take? Days, not weeks. The prosecutor is taking this case very seriously, especially given the evidence of premeditation and the attempts to flee accountability. 2 days later, my parents were arrested at the airport. They'd booked flights to Phoenix and were attempting to leave the state when airport security, alerted by a court order, detained them. The arrest made the local news. Local couple arrested for allegedly stealing daughter's car was the headline in the Austin American-Statesman, and the story included details about their attempted flight and the $22,000 theft. Emma called me immediately after seeing the news report. She was crying, but they weren't tears of sadness or guilt. They were tears of relief. It's over, isn't it? She asked. The criminal part is just beginning, but yeah, the part where they control the narrative is over. Tyler and I decided to postpone the wedding, Emma said. Not cancel it, just push it back 6 months. We want to do this right, with our own money and our own choices. I think that's smart. And Jess, I've been thinking about what you said about family being behavior, not blood. I want to be part of your real family, the one based on respect and honesty. If you'll let me, I'd like that. The court proceedings took 3 months. My parents' attorney tried every tactic she'd threatened, attempting to paint me as vindictive and money-obsessed, questioning my motives for prosecuting family members, and arguing that the theft was really a family financial arrangement gone wrong. None of it worked. The evidence was too overwhelming, the premeditation too clear, and the attempts to flee too damaging to their credibility. In the end, they pled guilty to reduced charges in exchange for full restitution and 2 years of probation. Frank sold the Mustang back to me for exactly what he'd paid, and I financed the purchase through my credit union at a reasonable interest rate. My parents moved to Arizona immediately after their sentencing. I haven't spoken to them since the day they were arrested, and I don't plan to. Emma sends me occasional updates, but I've made it clear that I'm not interested in reconciliation or family healing. Some bridges, once burned, aren't meant to be rebuilt. 6 months after getting my Mustang back, I was detailing her in my driveway on a Saturday morning when Frank stopped by. He'd brought his grandson, the young man he'd originally planned to give the car to as a wedding gift. "Jessica, I'd like you to meet Marcus. Marcus, this is the young lady I told you about, the one who taught me that sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing to do." Marcus was a polite kid in his early 20s, and he clearly appreciated classic cars. We spent an hour talking about the Mustang's history, her restoration needs, and what it meant to be the caretaker of something beautiful and irreplaceable. "Mr. Jenkins told me what happened with your parents," Marcus said as they were leaving. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, but I'm glad you got her back. Cars like this belong with people who understand their value." After they left, I sat behind the wheel of my Mustang and thought about everything that had happened. I'd lost my relationship with my parents, but I'd gained something more valuable, the knowledge that I was strong enough to stand up for myself, even when it cost me everything I thought I couldn't live without. The Mustang wasn't just a car anymore. She was proof that some things are worth fighting for, and that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones you need to protect yourself from the most. I started the engine, rolled down the windows, and drove out toward the hill country, music playing, wind in my hair, finally free from people who thought family was an excuse to take whatever they wanted. Some lessons are expensive, but the ones that teach you who you really are always pay for themselves in the end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.